Welcome to Westminster Watch, and I'm Nick Dubois. Coming up on the show, COP28 kicked off in Dubai with over 70,000 guests travelling to the United Arab Emirates to discuss how to tackle climate change. But the event has been controversial, to say the least, with the president of the summit claiming there's no science that fossil fuels must be phased out to stop global warming. And the UK comes in for criticism too, with Green campaigners saying Rishi Sunak's net zero rollback has set a bad example for developing countries. Despite a positive start, this year's COP summit has been mired in controversy. Dr. Sultan Ahmed Al Jaber, chief executive of the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company, is leading the crucial climate talks. His appointment as president has enraged climate activists, especially as leaked briefing documents show the UAE plans to discuss fossil fuel deals with 15 nations during the summit.
I will do everything in my power to channel the momentum you generate at the summit into an ambitious response to the global stocktake and to keep the North Star of 1.5 within reach.
Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's also faced outrage over his flying visit to COP28. He spent just 11 hours at the summit, despite saying beforehand that the UK remains a climate world leader. Facing accusation that he's now uninterested in green issues, the Prime Minister shared on the world stage his vision for the UK achieving net zero greenhouse gas emissions. Despite those claims, Sunak's governing party has recently delayed the phasing out of petrol vehicles by 5 years. A few weeks ago, the former International Environment Minister, Zach Goldsmith, told me they were wrong to think anti-net zero policies were a vote winner.
Do I think the Conservatives, were they to win, could be trusted on this issue? Right now, no. I don't think they can. I think the Conservatives are all over the place. And while I think the market, in any case, is going to continue to drive the transition in terms of clean energy, and it doesn't really matter which of the parties wins, when it comes to the natural environment, protecting our rivers, our biodiversity, showing leadership internationally on oceans and forests and all the other areas where the UK has been the world leader, Rishi Sunak has walked off the stage, and I don't see him re-emerging.
Now, let's bring in our panel. Joining us, we have the leader of the Climate Party, Ed Gemmell, also, of course, candidate for High Wycombe at the next general election, and Howard Cox, the founder of Fair Fuel UK and the mayoral candidate for reform at the London elections coming up next year. So, welcome, gentlemen.
Hi.
Let me kick off, if I may, with you, Ed. Just before COP28, the UN published their stocktake of progress in meeting the Paris Climate Accord agreement of 2015. And basically, it gave it a big fail. It said the nations, and COP in particular, are failing to deliver, keeping the Earth's temperature 2 degrees or below, even the much vaunted 1.5. So I suppose my question to you is, how do we get back on track, particularly when we have a very divisive issue already at this COP, where the president of COP himself, the head of the UAE ADNOC oil and gas company, has essentially said, we're not going to phase out fossil fuels, it's more about phasing down.
Getting back on track, I mean, there's two aspects of it. One is getting back on track for 1.5 and 2 degrees, and the other one is just getting COP back on track so it actually starts working. Unfortunately, I think that we're probably going to fail on both at this particular COP. I mean, the global stocktake you talked about, it's assessed that all of the NDCs, so those contributions that everybody voluntarily proposes, every country proposes, are going to see us only putting down our emissions by 2%, when they're saying we have to get them down, 45% to actually be safe in terms of our targets. The second part is clearly we've got a petrostate hosting this COP. We've got the CEO, one of the largest oil and gas companies in the world hosting it, who even himself, his veil slipped only a couple of days ago when he went out and said the science doesn't support the idea that fossil fuels need phasing down and phasing out in order to reach 1.5 degrees and net zero. So it's clearly at the moment on the failure stakes. If we're going to put it right, I think we need to draw a line under it. Never again should it be done in a petrostate.
But actually, if I stop you there, they're already talking about Azerbaijan as the next venue for next year.
Well, but this is even, I mean, you've picked up an even more ridiculous thing about it. Here we are, nearing the end of this particular COP. We don't even know where the next one's going to be. They're still jostling, and that should have been agreed years ago. And the irony of it is if it isn't fixed by those countries in Central and Eastern Europe as to where they want to hold it, it could be the UAE as president again coming up into the next COP, because it will stay with them as president and then it will be held in Berlin. So unbelievably, we could find the same COP president still running it if they can't agree.
Howard, look, let me put this to you as simply as I can. Hosting in Dubai, and possibly again, if Ed's got it right, means one of two things. Either the big fossil fuel producers are embracing the climate change agenda, or that COP has become, how can I put it, captured by the enemy. Which is it?
That's an interesting, very much polarised question. I mean, to answer it, it's no secret that I actually think COP26, COP27, all of the COPs are a waste of time. It's just a jamboree for the rich elite. I've been public affairs campaigning for the last 15 years on helping people to actually afford to fill their car up. These sorts of things. But they also want to breathe clean air. They also want to actually appreciate that the fact the planet is going through some sort of, I don't call it a crisis, but change. And so those are the sorts of things we should be working together on. And I think we should be working on incentivising people to move to clean fuel technology, rather than sitting around a big table of rich elite, multi-billionaire companies. I didn't get an invite to go there, and I represent 1.7 million drivers in this country who want to have a cleaner environment, but also they don't want to be hit in the pocket.
But Ed, picking up on what Howard's just said there, the truth is we're going to be investing in the future just to keep our economy going. That's just the reality, whatever it is. It requires investment. There's two things here, isn't there? First of all, the transition idea, heavy investment needed to help economies that are not as advanced as the United Kingdom, for example, get access to funds so they can transition to the green agenda. That is something that's discussed quite regularly at COP. Are you optimistic that there's money on the table now to help that transition?
I mean, there has been money on the table. I mean, I can't review all the different ones exactly now. I mean, connected with it is the loss and damage fund, which has been agreed. Now, there is a loss and damage fund.
Well,
of about
we'll come back to that. But I'm talking about, for example, 30 billion from UAE that have said it's available for investment towards transition. But actually, it's still a business loan, isn't it, at the end of the day?
Yeah, and there are other facilities being made available by international banks and national banks, which have been all effectively crafted, or whether they were crafted before COP, but they've been announced at COP as well. So that is happening on an international basis. I think it's a very different look when you look on the national basis, which maybe we can come on to at some point, and looking at what we should be doing in terms of economy in the UK. I think that at the moment, there is a move towards getting financing going into particularly the developing nations in order to help them with the transition. But I think there's other ways we could be doing it, and let's come on to the national picture in a minute.
Well, we'll do that, but very neatly you've brought us on to the loss and damage fund, which I'd like to explore, if I may, a bit. And perhaps I'll ask you first, Howard, on this score. The loss and damage fund actually was first conceived in 2015 and pretty much an abject failure in many ways, because they never agreed or reached the target of money that they wanted for these funds to be available to help countries predominantly in the Southern Hemisphere who've suffered from climate change. So much fanfare at the beginning of COP, and I challenge you here because this was a success. Something like 700 million has been committed to the loss and damage fund. That's a good thing, isn't it?
But it's all hot air. Where's it going? How is it being put into practice? If I actually saw a concrete approach to actually how this is actually helping a third world country to move to a greener agenda, then I may be saying, okay, it's working, but it's not working. These people at the moment are being browbeat into believing there is a climate change crisis, rather than, and I go back to what I said just now, let's go back to a clean fuel technology incentivisation, rather than actually been telling you, you're naughty people, you shouldn't be using diesel or petrol. In this country, for example, we're doing a good job. The UK has done a great job in terms of actually, quote, leading the way etc. And also, I'm standing as Mayor of London, and London is in the top 25% of the cleanest cities in the world. But yet we still got draconian things like ULEZs, ultra-low emission zones.
OK, we'll come on to that. But,
I think just to correct something, I mean, we're talking about the global south here. They're not being browbeaten into thinking there's a climate emergency. They're actually experiencing it. So they're experiencing the droughts, they're experiencing the floods in some of the places, they're experiencing extreme heat, and it's going up. I mean, we had something like 300 months in a row of increased temperatures on this planet. The science is clear. There is no discussion about it anymore.
Well, this is where we will disagree.
99.9% of scientists are now agreeing that we have a problem and we've got to solve it. And the thing that worries me, Howard, about people like you who talk like that is I assume that when you go to the general practitioner and you go in, the general practitioner says they're going to give you antibiotics, you say, oh, I don't believe you, because that's a scientist, of course, trying to help you. And that's exactly the same as these scientists.
Howard, pick up on that.
That's an infantile analogy. That is ridiculous. I'm a pharmacologist by training bar. I'm a medic. And I'm telling you now, for example, if I could see concrete science evidence that we're talking about doom and gloom, we're talking about the end of the, but we're at the tipping point. I hear all those sorts of things. I've been hearing this for ages. The ozone layer, for example, we can go back for all years and years and years. I'm telling you now that we are going through cyclical change at the moment, and that's what's happening. And yes, and I think it's arrogant to say that man can do anything about any parts of the climate change.
I mean, cyclical change happens. So it's not like there isn't climate change happening on the planet all the time. But 7 of the last 10 years have been the hottest on the planet. We are going in one direction. We saw 1/3 of Pakistan flooded. We have seen floods, hurricanes,
you're cherry picking, but I'm also seeing I'm seeing some islands actually growing out of water.
Let Ed make that point.
And let's just bring back what's actually driving that change, and in fact connect it to COP as well at the beginning. So when the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change was brought in, and that is now going back nearly 30 years now, we're talking about what they were saying is to stabilise greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, so to not increase them. And they were doing that because they had clearly found already at that point 30 years ago that increasing those greenhouse gases was driving the temperature. Now, in fact, what's happened is we were going to stabilise them. We haven't even stabilised the level at which we're increasing them. We've increased it by 60% since then.
Ed, thank you for your point. We won't delve more into the science, but I want to finish on this subject one thing. For all your grim warnings about what's been happening in the Southern Hemisphere, don't you think, therefore, that the UAE boasting that they put 100 million into the loss and damage fund, which, by the way, is less than half of a day's revenue from their barrels of oil, it's pathetic, isn't it?
Well, I'm sorry, I hate the word greenwashing, but it sounds exactly like what everybody talks about greenwashing. I mean, and it's not just the UAE. I mean, there's others there. We've got 2,500 oil execs who turned up to the event as well. I mean, what on earth are they there for? I mean, they're there trying to do deals on the side of it, and et cetera, et cetera. I mean, it's pathetic. I agree with you.
We'll move on to the UK because I know that I think it's pretty clear that Rishi Sunak, who went out there for a very brief period of time, I'm told he spent more time in the air than he did there. You had Keir Starmer, the leader of the opposition, spending longer out there. You've had the King Charles out there. I mean, the British have definitely had high-profile people there. But that really isn't the reality. They're there because they are addressing the audience back here. Rishi Sunak only spending 11 hours there, that fits his political agenda, doesn't it? Because he wants to send a signal, I'm on the side of people, I believe in climate change control, but actually I'm protecting the pound in your pocket.
Well,
good politics.
Well, that's music to my ears if that's the truth, but it's not the truth, is it, at the moment in time? You just said, climate change control. I mean, we've got to get back to reality. We cannot change the climate. It's not going to happen. And it's arrogant to believe we can do that. Rishi Sunak recently, as you know, moved the 2030 diesel and petrol ban of new car sales to 2035 to match what's happening with Europe. He didn't do that because of anything to do with the climate or helping anyone. It's because there's an election next year. It's politically expedient to do that. That's why he's doing it. And I'm afraid, Nick, from my point of view at the moment, we're not doing enough to help the poor person in the street because all of these policies, all these green policies and all these green subsidies are hitting people in the pocket. And that's what I'm up against.
And isn't that the tension for people like yourself, Ed, that the brutal reality is we're seeing in other countries as well, Germany not least, who are doing a massive row back now for all sorts of reasons, Austria rowing back from their green efforts. Here in the UK, Rishi Sunak has made a choice that says, because we can't really impact the level of carbon emissions in the world, I'm going to look after the interests of the British voter by saving them a few quid in their pocket with these delays. It's common sense, isn't it?
We know it's politicking. So, I mean, absolutely right. I mean, we both agree with that. We're absolutely on the same page as that. And it's rather pathetic and grasping at straws to some extent.
Isn't it real politics coming home to roost here for the Green lobby?
I think just to comment on Rishi and the way he's doing it generally, Rishi can't decide whether he's coming or going. You know, on the 20th, and I think we all agree that it doesn't matter what your political views are. On the 20th of September, he made this speech in which he rode back on, an EV introduction. But he started the speech by saying, I am unequivocal in the fact that we are going to keep up all our commitments to staying under 1.5 degrees. And then, of course, he then weakens one of those commitments.
Has he weakened them by much, though?
I think the reality of the car one, because still it looks like the manufacturers will be pressed to get forward to 80% by that point anyway. Yep. It's probably relatively minimal. It is a big issue, though, in terms of British leadership. And it's a bit of an issue in terms of the manufacturers. For those manufacturers, they had already moved operations and concentration and investment.
They're going to carry on, aren't they?
They're going to do it anyway, a lot of them, not all. But I think that's more where it comes down to, where I then totally diverge from the way Howard talks, is we talk about hitting people in the pocket here because of these so-called green policies, climate policies. In actual fact, this is the biggest business opportunity on the planet. Look, we can see everybody going towards climate change, and it doesn't matter whether you're Howard or I and you disagree whether climate change is happening. We've now got 149 countries with net zero commitments. That's 82% of the world's GDP dedicated to that direction. That is where we're going. All the money is going to be made there, and anybody who tries to delay Britain leading that is costing us for the future.
But Howard, is really, Ed says you both agree, but is Rishi Sunak really putting at risk the idea that the United Kingdom can be a good place to do business if you want to sell more wind farms, more solar panels, and build a green economy, if you like? Is he really putting that at risk by protecting as households from having to pay for heat pumps at about, I don't know, £5,000-10,000 or more, by rowing back some of the taxes at a time when they can't afford it?
Well, you hit the nail on the head. It's a time when we can't afford it. And I repeat, and I'm going to say to Ed quite directly to him, I am pro cleaning the climate, reducing emissions and protecting the climate as best we can. But you don't do it by hitting people in the pocket. And this big, incredible thing, you're telling me this incredible, 80%, or was it 81% of GDP of all these countries, and they're investing in this, and their GDP is going to go that way. I'm sorry, energy is expensive. And the best way at the moment in time is to have working in parallel. We do need solar. We do need wind farms. We do all those things. Hear it from my lips, I'm saying it, but we need to do it in a measured way without edicts and targets.
Well, hang on, let me before Ed comes in there, just challenge you, because as I said earlier, to be economically successful, industry needs to invest.
Correct.
Surely, if there are and let's face it, many of those countries I suspect Ed is talking about, there's lots of incentives to go and invest in green alternatives, green and renewables. If the United Kingdom wants to be on the playing field, the government have got to offer those and make it attractive to do business here. And that's your taxpayers' money that will be well spent.
That's where I was going, Nick.
But isn't that well spent money if it's going to make us a leader economically in investing in renewables?
I don't believe at this moment in time it is the best way forward. We need to have a long-term plan. I'm talking about a 30, 40, 50-year plan. I'm not talking... Look, we got an election next year in the UK, and we're going to be seeing a complete change. We're going to be moved to a left-wing socialist agenda. We're going to go green, all green, and the taxpayer's going to pay a lot more money out of their pocket in terms of actually putting subsidies into various business ventures. I think I'd set up a business now and say, I'm going to do this green thing, give me 100 million.
I mean, look, the Climate Party's been talking about this since our inception last year. And to put it into context, since the 1970s, when we had 25 to 30% of our GDP coming from manufacturing, we have dropped down to under 10%.
Correct.
Why is it currently at the moment that we don't have enough money for the NHS or for the police or for our social services? And in fact, our leaders spend their time nitpicking between where they can shift money from this to that, a little bit of subsidy there or take a little bit of money from
This is a different argument.
So, and why don't we have the money? Because we've been running a trade deficit for more than 2 decades at the moment. We're paying interest on it. And why are we doing that? Because we haven't got an industrial base. Now, this new clean industrial revolution is coming, whether we like it or not. And we both accept there are elements of it. Even Howard accepts that there's elements that we should be working on.
Even Howard.
But if we if we pull forward our targets big, hairy, audacious goal for the UK, national mission. Let's take a 2030 target to decarbonise, and let's get there first. And let's put everything into it. The minute you do that, you change the mentality of everybody.
Okay.
And in fact, what you do, your eco-tech company or your green finance business suddenly becomes worth 100 times more. The city puts the money in. It doesn't have to be government money. And suddenly they're investable businesses, and we start growing our economy for all of us in the future.
The virtuous circle, if you like. We know what Howard is going to say to his voters on the doorstep in the mayoral election about what the priorities should be. And he's clear. It'll be saving money in your pocket and the cost of living. What are you going to say to the voters in High Wycombe come the general election, whenever that may be, when you're saying the complete opposite?
Exactly as we said, and I did it in Uxbridge. I mean, I stood in the Uxbridge by-election.
How did that go?
In terms of what you're talking about, the campaigning on the street, probably did 1,000 conversations on the street. And the man on the street, the woman on the street says, look, I get it. Everyone's going there. I don't even need to believe in climate change. That's clearly the way we should be going if we're going to make money and see prosperity in the 2030s and 40s. And they were saying, we get it. Why don't our politicians? And we had 3 people who confessed themselves as climate deniers. OK? They confessed as climate deniers, and 2 of them said,
are you talking candidates?
No. We're talking now when we're talking to normal people on the street. 3 confessed as climate deniers, but 2 of them said, but we get it economically. We can vote for you because that's a national economic mission and we can see it, even if we disagree with your science.
But your challenge is you were up against a Conservative Party that had basically was rowing back on things like, in this case, ULEZ, which admittedly is about clean air, all right? And they won, or they held on to the seat against expectations. They took your vote. How many votes did you get?
It was, I mean, I can count them on my hands, you know,
Fine.
but I mean,
But
let's be honest, there were
that.
15 parties there, and those 15 parties together got less than 10% of the vote compared to the 2 main parties. You know, it was brutal in terms of what Labour and Conservatives can bring to a by-election, and they can't do that, as we know, in a general election. It's very different. I think there was a turning point in that, and I have to say it, and I've actually said it before, is it was the moment that the Labour candidate decided he was going anti-ULEZ. And it wasn't about ULEZ, it was about integrity. It was about standing up for what you believe. And I think at that moment, several thousand Labour voters went, I don't believe in him anymore, I'll stay at home.
So if a voter comes up to you and says, look, in the last 8 years, China has produced more carbon than the UK has produced since the Industrial Revolution around 1750. And China now produces 30% of world output of emissions. They're going to say to you, what's the point? Why should you penalise me when the impact is going to be 0?
I think the answer to that is extremely simple, is look, stop being altruistic. We're not doing this to save the world. We are, but we are doing it for a secondary reason, and that's economic opportunity and output. China at the moment is making all the money from climate change. It is making 88% of batteries around the world at the moment. It controls 100% of several of the components. It's making 60 to 70% of all stages of solar and wind manufacture. It's selling 54% of the world's EVs. And even worse, from our point of view, from security point of view in the UK, it is controlling the processing and in some cases even the production of the rare earth metals and minerals we need to make a lot of the tech we need.
So that's a threat.
It is. And recently there was a spat with America just to bring it in.
Is that going to win your argument on the doorstep? And I'm conscious of time.
Fine. In 20 seconds on that one then. So the argument is not only is there a security issue both on energy and etc., but also they're making all the money. And we can either never have enough money for the NHS and the police by paying China, or we can start to do it here and have them pay us.
Howard, you've got the same choice facing you when voters come up in your mayoral election. The Tories have stolen your thunder, though, haven't they? You should, shouldn't you, encourage your voters to back Conservative so you have a candidate who's actually committed to taking back these pressures, rightly or wrongly, off the pockets of voters, shouldn't you?
Well, the detail of this is I could go into what's happening compared to myself to the Conservative candidate. But the fact is, I've voted Tory for 50 years, Nick. And I'm sorry to say the current Conservative Party is Tory in name only. It's not doing what I'm a Thatcherite, etc. I believe in actually a small state, low tax. You've heard it all before, Nick. And from my point of view, I'll be standing on those policies. I'm getting rid of all ULEZ in London, not just the external one that's going out to Greater London. I'll be removing LTNs. I'll be removing pinch points. I'd be making cycle lanes much narrower, because the whole of it's like the Wild West here. I could go on for a party political broadcast.
I'm only going to stop you now, because it is turning into a party political broadcast. And before Ed wants his turn, it's only for time reasons, I'm going to be drawing the conversation to a close. So thanks, Ed Gemmell, for joining me, leader of the Climate Party and, of course, candidate in High Wycombe for the Climate Party at the next general election. Howard Cox, founder of Fair Fuel UK and candidate for reform at the upcoming London elections, which at least we know will be in May. Thank you for joining me. We can and will continue this conversation. And don't forget to check out TRT World on YouTube for more lively debate and conversation. But for now, from me and all the team here, goodbye and thank you for watching.